I'm Alison Robertson, Extension Field Crops Pathologist at Iowa State University, and we're going to be talking about tar spot in this episode of Crops TV. So the objectives that we have are to identify tar spot, understand the effective use of fungicides to reduce tar spot and protect yield. I'm also going to spend a couple of minutes discussing return on investment of a fungicide based on tar spot severity. And then I'd like to take a couple of minutes to introduce the National Prediction Modeling Tool Initiative. So before we start talking about tar spot, this is some data that comes from the Crop Protection Network, which is where corn pathologists from across the U.S. get together every year, and we estimate how much disease losses occur in each year. And as you can see, depending on the year, we may have more yield losses than in other years. And that, of course, all comes back to the disease triangle. But some of the most important diseases that we'll have is, here we can see gray leaf spot, probably the most important over this period of time that we've been collecting data. We have northern corn leaf blight, also very important. And then right down the bottom here, we have tar spot. And so the goal of this slide is just to make you aware that there are a lot of diseases that cause yield loss on corn, and that tar spot is just one of those diseases. And so we have to be mindful, and we have to remember that there are other things that we need to manage. When we look at tar spot compared to gray leaf spot in the United States, you can see gray leaf spot over the period of 2012 to 2021 and the percentage of yield loss compared to tar spot. Of course, tar spot only starts in 2018, and you'll remember that tar spot was first identified in the US in 2017. And if we look in Iowa, the percentage of yield loss to tar spot has ranged from from 0 to 1%. And with gray leaf spot, we've had up to 8% yield loss. 2018 was a particularly bad year for this disease. Right, so let's talk about identifying tar spot. By now, I'm sure that many of you who are watching this episode have probably seen tar spot. But for those of you who haven't, pretty easy to diagnose on a leaf. It just looks like spots of tar that have been splashed onto the leaf. And so you'll notice that those spots can either be very circular, or they can be kind of elongated and just different shapes that occur on the leaves. Sometimes those spots will bleed down the veins. That's what those arrows are indicating on the middle picture there. And then we can also get tar spots. We can see that on the husks of the ears. We need to be careful because tar spot, particularly early on in the growing season, can be mistaken for bug poop. And so this slide here shows a picture of bug poop. Those black spots on the leaf are bug poop. If you were to take a cloth or your thumb and just wipe, or your fingernail and scratches those spots, you would be able to remove them. With tar spot, you can't do that. So one of the things that I do is, if I see something on the upper leaf surface that looks like tar spot, this is a picture here. And so what I'll do is I'll turn over and look at the underside of the leaf as well. And you can see that that black spot also comes through on the underside. And the reason for that is that because that black spot is a fungal fruiting structure, almost like a sclerotia, if you like, that's embedded in that leaf tissue. And so we have this mass of fungal mycelium coming together and forming this structure that breaks through, not really breaks through the leaf surface, but can be seen on the upper and the lower leaf surface. So that's one of the tricks that I'll use, apart from also wiping off. Okay, as we think about tar spot, probably the one thing that I want you to leave here with is that leaf moisture favors tar spot development. And we've known this from pretty early on, but I think it's only in the last couple of years that we've really begun to understand just how important leaf moisture is. And so this is a great picture of a field in Michigan from Marty Chilvers. And what you can see here is it's on a pivot. You can see that where the pivot was, that the tar spot is way more severe than that corner where the pivot didn't irrigate that corn. And so the thing is that it's leaf moisture that drives that tar spot development, and that leaf moisture can be from precipitation, it can be from a extended dew, or it can be from precipitation. But so anything that keeps that leaf wet is going to not only aid in infection and disease development, but also going to favor those spots to produce spores and therefore drive the disease development. So this is some data from Darcy Telenko at Purdue University. And this is one of her research sites in Porter County, Indiana. And we have here the data from 2020, 2021, and 2022. And those lines, the blue, orange, and the gray lines, are showing the tar spot development on different leaves of a corn plant. And so you can see the detection dates when the tar spot was first detected. So 28th of July in 2020, 3rd of July in 2021, and then the 1st of September in 2022. You can see how that disease is developing. So in 2021, the disease started earlier and it developed much, much more quickly than it did in 2020 and definitely in 2022. And if we compare the data from 2021 and 2022, the rainfall, what you can see here is the blue bars show the precipitation in 2021, and the purple bars show the precipitation in 2022. And so what you'll notice in 2021 is that there were several days during the growing season when that location received over 1 inch of precipitation. And that really helped to drive that disease in 2021 compared to 2022, where Darcy didn't see the disease come in until the end of September. So many of you may have heard of the Tar Spotter app that is available, and this app predicts tar spot. It was developed by Dr. Damon Smith at the University of Wisconsin. What I wanted to point out to you is that as this Tar Spotter app has been developed over the last 4 years, Damon and his team have started to realize just how important that leaf wetness is. And so they've been including that data into the model. And so the original model just had precipitation in it, whereas now this newer model is including dew point and total rainfall, because we're realizing just how important leaf moisture is for disease development, and it's even more important than temperature is. We all know that fungicides can control tar spot, but there's a lot of questions out there. What is the best product? What should I be spraying? And when should I be spraying? And so the next series of slides are just going to be a lot of data that have been collected from across the Midwest, just looking at different products and also different timing of fungicides. And so what happens is all of us who have tar spot, we take part in these standardized trials in each of our states. And then at the end of the year, we put those data together. And if we've had tar spot, then that contributes to our understanding about how these products work against tar spot. So the data that you'll see is from the Crop Protection Network, and it includes data from a number of different states. So just a reminder that we do have this publication on the Crop Protection Network, which is the fungicide efficacy for control of corn diseases. And this is updated every year based on our experience with the previous year with our fungicide efficacy trials and what we saw in each of our states. And so if you look in that table, we have tar spot there and a list of all the fungicides that are registered for use on corn. And so that will give you a rating of how effective that fungicide is against that particular disease, tar spot in this case. Okay, so we're going to look at a lot of data. Most of the data is going to have tar spot severity on the ear leaf on the vertical axis. Occasionally, you might see AUDPC. AUDPC is the area under the disease progress curve. And the best way I can explain that is it's identical to soybean aphid, cumulative aphid days, right? So it just gives us a measure of how that disease progressed over the season. And so we can, that's also a good comparison. So along the bottom, so this data here is from Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and it's from 2019 and 2020. And we have our different fungicides along the x-axis and the non-treated control there on the far left. And what you can see is that all fungicides reduced tar spot severity, but there were some fungicides that stood out above others. And most of those fungicides that stood out are those newer products that contain 2 or 3 modes of action and just have a much longer effective period. What about yield? So in general, so once again, all laid out the same, but you'll see that by protecting that plant from tar spot, we often see that a little bit of a yield bump because we're protecting that yield. And in this case, the yield response ranged from 1.5 to 7.9% compared to that non-treated control. And we had those newer products that are available that significantly increase the yield over the non-treated control. This is data from a 2021 trial. So this is from 5 locations. You can see the locations down there: Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ontario. I don't think I mentioned this in the previous slide, but this is disease collected at R5 on the ear leaf. And so once again, you can see that all of those fungicides reduce the amount of disease, but there are some fungicides that are more effective than other fungicides. And so we tend to see the newer fungicides with the longer effective period tend to be better, especially under high disease pressure. And if we look at that in terms of yield, once again, you could see that we get greater yield by controlling that tar spot. And in this case, the yield response varied from 3.4 to almost 9%. And the Delaro Complete, Revitec, and Valtima significantly increased the yield over the control. This is 2022 data from 5 locations, which include Iowa. And this time the disease was collected a little bit later at R6. And we have our non-treated control in the gray, and then you'll see the different colored bars. And basically, we have applications that were made at VT-R1 with those gold standard, some of the better fungicides, I would call them. And then we also evaluated an application at VT-R1 plus 3 weeks after treatment. And in that 3 weeks after treatment, we used a generic, what would be a generic product. So Headline Amp will be generic next year. And then in the orange, we used the generic first, followed by the gold standard fungicide, just to see if you're going to do this double application, could you get away with a generic? So one thing to notice here is that with the double applications, we did get slightly better control, So what we want to do is we want to look at the bars, and if a bar has a different letter to a bar that we're comparing it with, then it's significantly different, right? And so you can see there that the Valtima followed by the Headline Amp, or the Headline Amp followed by the Valtima, and the Headline Amp followed by the Delaro Complete, they were significantly different from that VT-R1 application, just the single application of one of those gold standard products. But essentially, if we compare over all of it, I'm not sure, especially as this is only 1 year of data, I'm not sure that double application really paid a whole lot in terms of over that single application at R1. And really, when we're thinking about did it pay or not, then we want to be looking at yields, right? And so if we look at the yields, no, it didn't pay. there was no significant difference between the yields for these various applications. Yes, you can see that, there's numerically greater yields that are occurring, but the fact that this wasn't significant, that p-value is 0.66, means that if we were to do this trial again, we definitely wouldn't see the same results. There's a great chance that we wouldn't see the same results in terms of yield. Okay, so what about fungicide timing? This is some data from one of Darcy Telenko's students at Purdue University. We have the growth stages of corn along the bottom there. And then what she and her student did was they evaluated Valtimer and Lucento, which contain different FRAC groups, so different mode of action groups. And what they did there was they either applied the fungicide when they first detected tar spot, or a first detection plus 3 weeks after treatment. And then they also applied those fungicides, a single application at V8, VT, and R3, and then double applications of V8 plus 3 weeks after treatment, VT plus 3 weeks after treatment, and R3 plus 3 weeks after treatment. And so when we look at their data, we'll have the Valtimer in the green bars and the Lucento in the blue bars. So this was in 2020. So the data for 2020, tar spot was detected on the 28th of July. And so we have our AUDPC, right? So that's the area under disease progress curve. The gray bars give us our untreated check. And then along the x-axis, we have when the fungicide was sprayed. And so what you can see here is that with the Valtimer, that application at the first detection on the 28th of July, which would have been very close to VT, or the VT application, or the V8 followed by the 3 weeks after treatment application, all did best at controlling the disease. When we look at Lucento, the application at the first detection, or at VT or R3, that single application, did best at controlling the disease. When we look at the data from 2021, tar spot was, you'll remember that in that year, tar spot was detected very early on. They had a lot of moisture at the beginning. And in that case, in both cases, that V8 application followed by the 3 weeks after treatment was best at reducing the disease for both of those products. And then when we come to 2022, where tar spot was detected so late during the growing season, the 9th of September, at the first detection, that was the best time to apply the fungicide for both products. And then also that V8 by 3 weeks after treatment is coming out, also doing well. But one thing to notice here is look at the y-axis and look at the AUDPC numbers compared to in 2021 and 2022. We had extremely low disease severity here. And so I would take the 2022 data at least need to be looked at a little bit more carefully just because there was so low disease. Okay, and then when we look at the yields in 2020, the yields were maybe just significant. In 2021, there were significant differences in the yield, and so we saw an 18 to 31% increase in yield by applying that fungicide, and significantly greater yields for that application at V8 and then at VT with that 3 weeks after application. Those were the best times to apply. And incidentally, of all the years that Darcy's been doing this work on tar spot, 2021 is the only year where that double application really helped reduce the amount of disease. And then in 2022, very, very low disease and no significant effect of that fungicide application and reduced disease on yield. Okay, I wanted to show you some data that comes from Cody Schneider, who is the farm manager at the Southeast Research Farm. And this is part of his master's component. And he had some really neat data showing timing of application at 2 trials. So these were both sprayed with Miravis Neo, and you can see the tar spot severity there on the vertical axis, and then you can see when he sprayed. So he sprayed at V6, a single application of V6, single application of V12, single application at R1, a single application at R3, and then a V12 followed by an R3, or a V6 followed by an R1. And so if we look at that data, first of all, you'll see the check at R3. And so this gives us an idea of how much disease was in the trial at R3. And this was just done on the check plants. So we had about 1% disease severity of tar spot. By the time we got to R5, that disease severity on the ear leaf is now up to almost 10%. And in the upper canopy is hovering at around about 5% for tar spot. With the gray leaf spot, we're looking at about 2.5% on that ear leaf, and then in the upper canopy, about 1.5%. And so if we have a look at the data, this is his corn-on-corn plots, we'll see that the application of a fungicide at V6, yes, it helped with tar spot, but it didn't help at all with gray leaf spot. That application at V12 for tar spot helps, and also helps with gray leaf spot. And then you can see that the best applications were the R1 application, or the V12 followed by R3, the V6 followed by R1. But so really the point here is that at R1, when Cody saw a few spots of tar spot in his trial, that R1 application that he made was most effective for reducing tar spot in this trial. And there wasn't much benefit from that double application from either double applications. This is his corn on soybean trial that he did, so laid out exactly the same. You can see he had a lot more disease in the corn on soybean plots. But once again, we see that R1 application is just as effective as those double applications of that fungicide for controlling both tar spot and also gray leaf spot. If we look at the yield data, Cody and I were a little bit disappointed about this because we didn't detect any effect of treatment on yield. So there were no statistical differences between the yields. But I think you can clearly see that applying the fungicide, we did get greater yields. So we've been looking at some data from across the Midwest. And so I'm just going to talk about the Iowa fungicide efficacy trials that we had this year. So in the usual 6 locations around the state, these data here tell you the hybrid that was planted, the date that it was planted on, and then the harvest date. So you can see they're all pretty much planted around about the same time and harvested at the same time. In 2022, we only got disease at 2 locations. That would be the Northeast Research Farm, where we had a little bit of tar spot and gray leaf spot, but very low disease severity. And then down at Crawfordsville at the Southeast Research Farm, we had pretty good development of tar spot and gray leaf spot there. So the products that we tested are listed there, most of the usual products, and we applied at V12 and R1. And then we had the Xyway that was applied at planting, just sprayed over the furrow, and we did not apply that in furrow, and the Xylem Plus that was applied in furrow. And then we also had applications of Adastrio with a lower rate of Xyway at R1, and the Xylem Plus was applied at V5 and R1. So let's have a look at that data. So what we have here on the vertical axis is the percent tar spot on the ear leaf. This would be at V5. I have all the fungicide products along the bottom there. The orange bars are giving you the controls. And then you can see the light green bars are for that V12 application, and the dark green bars are for the R1 applications. So this would be tar spot. So you can see we had pretty good disease severity in our controls, greater than 20%. And all fungicides reduced tar spot, whether they were applied at V12 or at R1. The average disease severity on the fungicide applied at V12 was 7.8%, whereas when that fungicide was applied at R1, it was about 4%. So this tells us that the application at R1 was better than that application at V12. And incidentally, tar spot was present at R1 when we applied the fungicides, but only a single spot every now and then in the trial. So I would consider that R1 application to be at first detection if we think of this in terms of Darcy's work. When we look at gray leaf spot, so the chart's laid out the same way, and here we have that V12 application controlling that gray leaf spot better than that R1 application. And so that was particularly interesting to me because that's what I've seen in previous years as well, that V12 application seems to be better for gray leaf spot management than the R1 application. This is the data from NERV. So you can see at the Northeast Research Farm, we had just over 1% tar spot severity on those ear leaves. Once again, those fungicides are all reducing the amount of tar spot. Not much difference between the V12 and the R1 application because the disease severity is so low. If we look at the gray leaf spot, pretty low disease severity there as well. At the Southeast Research Farm, we were looking at about 3% disease severity on those controls for gray leaf spot. And here at Nashua, we're looking at about 1% disease severity. But once again, here, even though low disease severity, you could maybe argue that V12 application was better for controlling gray leaf spot than that R1 application. These data show the yield response to fungicide at V12 and R1 across Iowa. And what you'll see is there at Nashua, where we had a little bit of tar spot and gray leaf spot, not a lot of yield response there from that small amount of disease. But you'll notice there at SURF that the yield response to those applications at V12 or R1 ranged from about 7.5 to almost 8.5 bushels. And then at the Northwest, Southwest, and Northern Research Farms, where we didn't have any disease, we did see a little bit of a yield response. So that's normally what we see, hovering around about 3 bushels per acre when we don't have that disease. And it's really hard to explain the results at the Ag Engineering and Agronomy Farm here in Iowa. Just that corn was really droughted and just didn't do well. Okay, so just to summarize the corn fungicide efficacy trials here from Iowa, we only observed disease at the Northeast and the Southeast Research Farm. And so at R5, the Southeast Research Farm, the tar spot on the ear leaf was about 22% and gray leaf spot was about 3.1%. And I've put in some cartoons there from the cropprotectionnetwork.org just so that you can visualize what that amount of disease looked like at SURF. And at NERV, or the Northeast Research Farm, tar spot was around about 1.3% and gray leaf spot was about 1.1%. And once again, there's a cartoon there just giving you an idea of just how much disease was present in those trials. At the Southeast and the Northeast Research Farm, all of the fungicide applications reduced disease. And as we've seen in the past, that V12 application was generally better against gray leaf spot than the R1 application. And I think that's because gray leaf spot develops in the bottom of the canopy and then moves up the plant. And so at V12, we can get that fungicide down to protect those lower leaves. And so we can delay that disease from starting in the lower canopy. whereas at R1, the R1 applications of fungicides were generally better against tar spot, probably because tar spot doesn't always start in the lower canopy, and it can start mid-canopy. Also, R1 is around about when we see tar spot coming in. And then we saw no treatment effect on yield at any location. And the yield response ranged from -8 bushels at that ag engineering farm to 8.5 bushels at the Southeast Research Farm. And in general, we had a better yield response from that application at R1 compared to that application at V12. That was at 5 of the 6 locations, and that's what we've shown in several years previous as well, that if you're going to put a fungicide on your corn, that in general, that R1 is when we tend to see more of a benefit from that fungicide. The next slides I'm going to show you come from Darcy, and these are some pretty nice work that she's done. I'm looking at fungicides and the return on investment, particularly based on tar spot severity. And so what she and her student wanted to do was they wanted to look at yield response and net return of a fungicide. And so they have high disease conditions and low disease conditions. So these are the data, the CITEA data that she used from 2 locations in Indiana, Wanata and West Lafayette, and 2019 through 2021. And you could see the data there, the severity of the tar spot stroma, which would be those black spots, and then the severity of the tar spot foliar symptoms, which would include the black spots plus just the dead leaf tissue around that. And so she can divide that data into high years where there was high disease, and then years where there was low disease. And the other thing that I should point out is these trials are fungicide efficacy trials. So that would be where she's comparing different products. And then she also has fungicide timing trials. So where she's taking one or a couple of products and just comparing them at different timings. So if we look at the fungicide efficacy trials, these are the products that she compared, and you can see how the fungicides reduce the amount of disease. And we have some products that are standing out that we've seen in previous slides. If we look at the timing slides, we have over these 5 environments, the best time to apply the fungicide was R2. R2 was the best, followed by R3 or milk. So when we look at the yield response in each of those environments, so the high disease is going to be in the black bars and the low disease is going to be in the green bars. And this is with the different fungicide products. And what you can see is that in that high disease environment, that's when we generally see a positive yield response, right? Whereas in the low disease environments, first of all, we're seeing less of a yield response, and then sometimes we even see those negative yield responses. So in the high environment for tar spot, the average yield response was about 9.5 bushels. It ranged from -1 to almost 19 bushels. And then in that low environment, that average yield response is around about 3 bushels per acre, which is similar to what I see here in Iowa in low disease years. And that ranges from -8 to 11 bushels per acre. And then when we look at the timing, so once again, with that high disease, we generally see that positive yield response. With that low disease, we're getting these negative yield responses coming in. And so average yield response in that high environment is about 14.5 bushels, whereas in that low environment, we're looking at a negative yield response there. Doing the math, Darcy and her student calculated that there's an average net return of almost $30 to almost $50 per acre when we have high tar spot disease pressure compared to if we haven't sprayed a fungicide. But under very low disease pressure, we're losing money and maybe making a couple of bucks by spraying that fungicide. Okay, so the last thing that I want to introduce you to is the National Prediction Modeling Tool Initiative, or the NPMTI. And this is a map showing you who the participants were in the NPTMI project in 2022. And so you'll see the states that are involved in this that are doing corn, but you'll also notice that this initiative includes states that are looking at wheat and cotton, and sometimes both, two or more crops. The participants also include the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the USDA, and then the National Agricultural Genotyping Center. And so what are we doing? The idea behind this initiative is that we're quantifying association. So we're looking for relationships between how much pathogen inoculum is out there, disease development, and then the weather. And based on all that data that we're collecting, we're developing these tools that will help farmers and agronomists predict whether there's going to be a particular disease or mycotoxins that may affect U.S. row crops. And so a really good example of this would be the TarSpotter app, which is using data from NPTMI to improve that app. So what we've been looking at, this started really in 2020. And so the last 3 years, we've been focused on grey leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, tar spot, and also gibberella ear and stalk rot, with a view to predicting vomitoxin. But in the next couple of years, we're going to be looking at southern rust, and then also curvularia leaf spot, which is a big problem down in the southern US. So what are we doing? We've been doing coordinated small plot trials across all these different states. And then we also collect data from commercial fields. And some of you may have been part of that collecting. You may have had your field scouted for disease. To monitor the amount of pathogen that is present in the area, we're using spore traps. So we're using this Burkhardt cyclone spore sampler, which is kind of the gold standard for sampling spores. It's a really expensive piece of equipment, but it sucks in air and then collects the spores in little tubes. And then we're also using this low-cost spore sampler, which is basically just a rod that spins in the air with microscope slides on it that are coated in Vaseline. And then as it spins through the air, any spores that are in the air get stuck to that Vaseline. So from to quantify the pathogen, we collect residue from the small plot trials and also the commercial fields at planting. And that residue gets sent to the National Agricultural Genotyping Center, where they quantify the amount of pathogen in that residue. And then from the small plot trials, we collect the tubes or the slides weekly. And then they come back to my lab or Damon Smith's lab in Wisconsin, and we use a molecular technique called quantitative PCR to detect how many spores are present on those slides or in that tube. And we do that weekly, so that means we're able to monitor how the pathogen numbers throughout the growing season. While we're monitoring those pathogen numbers, we're also collecting disease in the coordinated small plot trials. And so we go out 4 to 5 times during the growing season, and we look at the disease on the ear leaf, on the first and second leaf above the ear leaf, and the first and second leaf below the ear leaf, on 10 plants per plot. So we're collecting an enormous amount of data, seeing how the disease is developing during the growing season. For the commercial fields, we just go out once at R5, so at dent, and just get an idea of how much disease occurred in that field. And then we're monitoring the environment using weather stations that are present on the research farms that we are at, but then also using cloud-based data services. And from all of that, from the disease data, the pathogen data, and the environment data, we're then able to develop tools and models that will enable us to predict disease. And so we're working with Los Alamos National Laboratory, and they're helping us develop the web interface and the tools to predict disease. So I wanted to show you just a little bit of data that we've been collecting. So this is one of my sites at the Southeast Research Farm. So you can see the Burkhardt spore sampler there, and then also the little spinning slide sampler, which is they're both powered by solar panels. And these are put in the middle of our trial. So that corn that you see in the background is the trial, and that we were assessing to see how much disease was there. And so this is data from 2020, and Cetusferia tursicum would be the northern corn leaf blight fungus. And so we first detected spores of the northern corn leaf blight fungus at Ames and down at the Southeast Research Farm around about the 3rd to the 4th week of May. You'll see on the slide that we have light blue and dark blue, which represents low residue and high residue. And so in this trial, we either planted no-till corn, so we had very high residue, where we would expect to see more pathogens and more disease, or we had low residue, where we would see less pathogens and less disease. And you can see there's not really a very big difference between the low residue and the high residue. In 2021, we first detected spores a lot later during the growing season, so the last week of June. Once again, not a whole lot of difference between the low and the high residue. So what about disease detection? So in 2020, we did not get any northern corn leaf blight in our trial. So even though we were detecting spores that were present, we just didn't have the right environment, that side of the disease triangle, to be able for that northern corn leaf blight to develop. But in 2021, we did see some northern corn leaf blight developing. Here we have the spore data again. And so you'll remember that we detected the spores on the last week of June, the 28th of June. But it wasn't until the week of the 10th of September, so that second week of September, where we observed northern corn leaf blight. And when we did observe the northern corn leaf blight, not a whole lot there, but this would be the severity at R5. And you can see that. So we have the darker bars are for the high residue, and the lighter bars are for the low residue. And then we have the blue bars are for a resistant hybrid, and the orange bars are for a susceptible hybrid. And so you can see the amount of northern corn leaf blight that we had there. So all of this data, when we saw the spores, how much northern corn leaf blight we had, and then the weather variables will all get fed into models then to help us predict whether northern corn leaf blight is going to be a problem and whether we need to spray for it. So just to summarize the NPTMI, this is our research is contingent on dollars coming from the Senate Appropriations Committee, and in the future, we're hoping to increase the number of small plot trials per state, because we get so much data from those trials that they can really help us develop these models very, very quickly. The TaskSpot model, so the TaskSpotter app and the model will be finalized in spring, so within the next couple of months. And then over the next 2 years, we'll be developing models for gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, and vomitoxin. And as I mentioned, next year we're going to start modeling, or next 2023, we will start modeling for southern rust and curvularia leaf spot. So an overall summary of this episode, if we go back to our learning objectives to identify TaskSpot, beware of bug poop. That would be my one of the number one things to remember. And then make use of the TaskSpotter app. Download that app, and that app can help you predict whether you've had the right conditions for TaskSpot to develop in your field. And so it can help you identify which field you should be scouting for TaskSpot. To a better understanding of the effective use of fungicides to reduce tar spot and protect yield. All fungicides, we saw from our data that all fungicides reduce tar spot. In most years, one application at R1 is going to be enough to reduce that tar spot to decent levels that are not going to affect yield very much. And then remember that if we have wet leaves, we're going to have more severe tar spot. And so in years where we have a lot of moisture, high relative humidities, a lot of precipitation, high dew points where those leaves are just sitting around and they're wet, those are years where we really need to get in and spray a fungicide to manage this disease, especially until we have hybrids that have good resistance to the disease. The return on investment for a fungicide, I think it's pretty logical that when tar spot severity is high, you're going to get a better return on investment for that fungicide application. And then lastly, I introduce you to the National Prediction Modeling Tool Initiative, which is an initiative funded by the Senate Appropriations Committee, in which we're developing tools to predict disease and mycotoxins in corn and cotton and wheat. And the hope is to, as we get more money, to expand that initiative to other crops, including soybeans would be our next field crop that we want to target. So I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks for joining this episode of Crops TV. And if you have any questions or comments, my email is up there. And so you're always welcome to send me an email or you can direct message me on Twitter.